Great. Hi, everyone. Are these working? Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I am literally Jess's #1 fan, and as she will tell you, I spend a lot of my life stalking her and texting her and trying to hang out with her. We first met when I was working on a campaign called Free Periods, which was fighting to end period poverty in the UK. 1 in 10 girls in the UK can't afford menstrual products, and we were trying to get young girls and young people to kind of fight back at that. And Jess had been working for a long time with another MP called Paula Sheriff on that issue. She was incredibly helpful to us, and we ended up changing 2 laws. Pretty cool. Jess does that as her job. To ensure that all girls in schools get free menstrual products from now on. I think it's really interesting that this is called How to Change Your Life Festival, and we're here talking about speaking truth to power and activism and politics, because for me, activism and feminism was the thing that changed my whole life. It was the way I found community and purpose and friends, and I always say I only do any of this selfishly because it just makes me happy. And I think there's no one who more represents that than Jess. So what have you been up to recently? Busy?
Yeah, it's the world's gone mad. It's gone completely batshit, I suppose, is the best way to describe how the world is at the moment, but specifically the UK Parliament. I'm not busy, in fact. I am on holiday.
Is it an actual break, or what are you going to be doing?
No, so the reality is that the 5-week prorogation, which we will henceforth call shutting down of Parliament, it coincides with the recess of the conference recess, the parliamentary conference recess, so this week, today, it's probably going to be all over the news. The Lib Dems are having their conference. I believe one of my colleagues is meant to be leaving the Labour Party to go to the Lib Dems. I don't know who it is, but about 19 people asked me if it was me last night. I was like, Tom, am I leaving the Labour Party? People keep asking me. I didn't know that I was.
It's like they're trying to hypnotise you.
And so it's sort of 2 weeks longer than the time we would normally have been off Parliament for conference recess. Frankly, I think that conference recess, and sorry, I'm using the word recess to mean break, I think that that's a massive waste of time. We shut down our legislature for 3 weeks of the year, every year, to basically go and drink champagne at a Sky News reception and for people to stand in a power pose. I'm not entirely sure why that needs to happen, but the difference between prorogation and just going on recess is that the Parliament ends, and the end of the Parliament literally means that any legislation that had been going through previously or anything that was in the making falls and dies.
So that was my next question. It's put many things on hold, but one is that 12 laws that were supposed to be passed in the next few weeks are on pause and won't be passed, including the domestic abuse bill, which you were a huge part of. Why is that bill so important, and why do we live in a country where politicians think it's okay that you can just stop that?
Why we live in a country... I'm going to blame the people for why we live in a country where politicians think that, because you elected them. So shame on you. The truth of the matter is that the domestic abuse bill was seen as being a legacy issue for Theresa May, and so it was being rushed through in the last days of Theresa May's premiership. And when I say rushed through, I mean we'd been working on it for 4.5 years, and it should have been available 2 years previously, but Parliament moves really slowly. It had become about her leaving something behind from her premiership that was half decent. But unfortunately, it isn't people's real lives, people's actual everyday existence. So the bill would have done a number of things. It's not good enough. If it was, down to me, I would have been amending it now. I would have been working on it to make it much, much better, to make sure that it had real people's lives in it. But the bill in itself, the domestic abuse bill, would have changed the definition of domestic abuse, which meant that people could be charged for different sorts of emotional and financial abuse that are normal and present in the pattern of domestic abuse. And it would have also The most important bit of the bill for me, something that we have worked on for many, many years, is it would have stopped in the civil courts and family courts the cross-examination of perpetrators of domestic violence of their victims directly. So because we no longer have legal aid in this country, really, unfortunately, people have to represent themselves, and a strange quirk of that has been that a man who has raped you and been convicted of raping you even is allowed to cross-examine you in a court of law to try and seek access to your children. Now, everybody in the House of Commons, well, not everybody, there are some idiots, but most people in the House of Commons and the House of Lords all agree that this is something that needs changing, and so we've tried to change it twice, but every single time it gets to be about to be happening, the Tory party implodes, and so it's the first time Theresa May called an election and it killed the bill then, and now Boris Johnson wants his day in the sun, so the bill got killed again, and yesterday a woman came into my surgery and she is about to be cross-examined by her rapist. And so it might not mean anything to Boris Johnson, and it might not mean anything to, I think his advisors described it as a low and insignificant bill. But it means a lot to my constituents, and I suppose that is the whole reason to be there and fighting.
It's so awful.
It is awful.
You recently wrote an incredible public letter to Boris Johnson in which you talked about the way... Did you actually send it as well?
Yeah,
Okay,
you
good.
have to send it. Otherwise he'll be like, I've never received this letter. Sometimes you'd put them out publicly and then you forget to send them.
That's what I do.
I'd text a Lenker in my office and be like, we did post this letter, didn't we?
Quickly.
Yeah.
It got lost in the mail. Need more money for the mail. In which you talked about the way that he's treating the people of this country as if they're a game. I want to quote something you said, because it's a very amazing letter if no one has read it, but she said, their jobs, their businesses and their safety are only casino chips to you, ones you can afford to chuck on the table at a whim. You've been an MP for 4 years and working in sort of this area for a long time. How do you stay focused on the people that matter? I mean, he clearly hasn't, and I think a lot of people feel like politicians have just forgotten about people. How do you stay focused on your constituents and not get wrapped up in it?
Well, for a start off, I think that you still be one of them, for a start off. So I live in the area that I represent, and so I am as affected as my constituents are by if the local hospital shuts its maternity services. I'm affected, I'm literally affected because my son's school is no longer open on a Friday afternoon because of school education cuts. They cannot afford to stay open 5 days a week, and that's the same of 27 schools in Birmingham. And so it isn't just, I've got a brother who's on universal credit. I am of the people. I am, it is not that something is being done to them, it is being done to us. And I imagine, I know some of Boris Johnson's siblings. I'm not sure any of them are on universal credit. One of them has just quit his job, so a change of circumstances might have led to, I'm sure he'll be joining the dole queue. But also, very differently, I'm sure, to Boris Johnson, and I'll be so bold as to say it's not just Boris Johnson, most of the cabinet, and the vast majority, actually, of quite a lot of politicians, and from all sides, I don't wish to just criticise the Tories, is that, I have an open office, so I run my office like an advice centre, because there is no advice centres left. And so yesterday I was in my office all day, and around, we would have spoken to, and people would have come in, around 150 people each day that we're dealing with. And we're always dealing with people with problems. People don't come in and say, it's the everything's all right alarm, unfortunately. So, and I make sure that I do that at least once, if not twice a week, that I sit all day just as a normal advice worker and give advice to my constituents. Because otherwise, you do forget. I worry all the time. I worry that my children are going to grow up posh because I've got a fancy job.
And they're coming to things like this?
Yeah, my son is currently in the green room watching The Shining on a phone. But I worry that they're going to grow up posh because I let them stop at the service station. Genuinely, as a child, this really worries me that I think they're going to grow up privileged because when they say, can we stop at the services and get a sandwich, I say yes. And would have been anathema to my mother. She would have been like, you'll eat the corned beef sandwiches we've made that have been in the car for 7 hours. We can't afford to feed you all at the service station. Do you know how much money that costs? And I have a constant battle being part of the establishment now, and I can't pretend that I'm not. And it would be fake. And a lot of what the people who currently try and use the establishment against people like me, so your Farages, your Johnsons, your Dominic Cummings, they're all real establishment figures, and it would be fake of me to think that I'm not part of the establishment now, because I am. So you have to spend a huge amount of time maintaining genuine links with the people you're there to represent. And it's the same as a manager going onto the shop floor. You know, if you own a company, you should go. If you own Tesco, you should go and work in a Tesco every now and again.
You know that show, Secret Shopper?
Oh, yeah.
They should do that with politicians.
Get
them to, like, go undercover.
Yeah. I'm not sure I go undercover very well, though, unfortunately.
Secret Shopper's when the manager goes undercover.
Onto the shop floor.
Yeah, it's great. That's really interesting, because you've also talked a lot about our current Prime Minister's ambitions and the way in which they kind of prevail over the moral sense of duty. And I think we all feel like we're pawns in his life plan at the moment. You're obviously very ambitious, and there's a room full of assuming very ambitious people. How do you manage your personal ambition and doing what you think's right, and when does that kind of balance come into play? Because it's a big thing to be like, I'm going to be MP. It takes a lot of kind of balls.
Yeah, absolutely. Although, to be honest, I've made genuinely, I shall act out for you the decision making. Somebody from the Regional Labour Party phoned me and said, there's some current vacancies coming up in the West Midlands because MPs are standing down, or that we think we might win some seats from the Liberal Democrats and the Tories at the time. You know, people have suggested that you might be interested in standing. And I literally went like this. I was like, Tom, they're asking if I should be an MP. And he was like, all right, yeah, that sounds all right. So it wasn't a massive decision that I had to make, to be perfectly honest. I think I had already made the decision that I thought that I had something to offer, and that's the key thing. That's the key thing to get over, and to think that you'll be able to do it.
You've done, books, and you're very public.
Yeah.
And
I think that what I have to try and constantly be, and I suppose this is about speaking truth to power, that if you are going to genuinely speak truth to power, you actually have to tell the truth. And that is a single really important thing. So it would be a lie to say that I'm not ambitious and that I don't have ambition, and that some of the decisions I made will undoubtedly be about my own progress. I don't want to pretend that I'm some, absolute sort of emotional eunuch and I don't care about my own progress. I absolutely do care about my own progress, but it's the cost. It's what are you willing to pay for progress? And I think that Boris Johnson has as one example, has a completely different metric of what he's willing to pay. So I don't believe that Boris Johnson he's written horrendous racist things and homophobic things, and has been pretty sexist in the last couple of weeks. Yeah, girly swats. But fundamentally, he is quite his politics. He's from the Liberal metropolitan elite. He is part of, Joe Johnson is his brother. Rachel Johnson is his sister. Yeah. Joe Johnson is married to Amelia Gentleman, who broke the Windrush scandal. This is not a family of people who are, sitting around being necessarily idly racist. Maybe they are. I don't know how posh people behave, but maybe they are. I don't know. Maybe they are. But fundamentally, I don't think he'd vote against gay marriage. I don't think he'd vote against women's rights. But he has been willing to put that aside because he thinks the best way to win is with fear and division. Now, I'm not willing.
And with the far right.
And with an allegiance with sort of horrible identarian dissent. And I think that he thinks that it's a price that is worth willing to pay. Now, I don't think that is if that was the option laid out to me and said, look, Jess, you could become the Prime Minister or the President. I say, why aim low? And you could do this if because ultimately fear is easy to spread, so you could sell fear. I wouldn't do that. But when I speak of hope, and when I speak passionately, and I speak trying to make a more nuanced and complex argument about people's lives that isn't as easy to sell as fear, it would be a lie for me to say that I wasn't doing some of it because I know people like it. I don't wish to present that I don't think about what people will like. I hate people who say I don't care what anybody thinks about me, because that is just not true. And if you don't care what people think about you, you're probably quite horrible.
I think it's such a good point, and I also think it's a huge part of activism or politics or anything like that, because
it's not totally selfless. Well, you started by saying it's not totally selfless. I do it because I like it.
Yeah, people always say to me, what I run a feminist group and do lots of that stuff. People always say, oh, it's so great and it's so brave. I'm like, I much prefer this to the job I had before, where I was doing social media for like a company. Like, this is fun.
This is better than banking.
And people like it and people listen. Like, I don't think there's any shame in enjoying what you do. We've got this weird thing where if you're doing anything good for the world, people think you have to
wear a
be
hair
this like
shirt.
selfless.
No, I'm not at all selfless. If my husband were here interviewing me, he would literally roll his eyes at everything that I say. I am not at all. I'm not totally selfless. And but what I think that happens at the moment is that the idea of truth has become completely and utterly mixed up with the idea of truth speakers, which essentially just means you're being racist. We've replaced they're being really honest. I just say what I think, and invariably that means that they say racist things. You can also tell the truth and not be a racist.
I've made a T-shirt that says the devil doesn't need an advocate, because that's the thing that I get said most, like, just to play devil's advocate. Don't.
Pack it in. But I think that I constantly check myself, and I constantly think, is what I am saying true? And I make it really, like a personal point all the time to be like, hang on, do I actually think this? I mean, not about everything. I get asked to sign 1 million round robin letters, and sometimes I don't even read them. I just think that person knows what they're talking about HS2. I'll say yes. So it's not that I'm like obsessive about everything that I do, but I do just try and think, am I being honest? Now, I would really like it if Boris Johnson could answer that question in front of the nation.
Yeah.
The answer would be no.
I'm interviewing him next week. Can you imagine? You've talked before about not feeling like you fit in Parliament, and I actually went to the House of Parliament recently on a school trip, still at university, and we had a talk from John Hayes, the MP, and at the end he was kind of staring at me really horribly the whole way through, and then it was really weird and there weren't many of us, and then at the end he just looks at me and goes, your hair is much too bright. I was like, what are you talking about? And then I was like, oh, do you think I could ever become an MP with this colour hair? My hair was brighter then. And he went, no, absolutely not. And then he got like all his friends around him to say that I couldn't become an MP with my colour hair.
What a wanker.
And it was the only...
It's rude, that is.
I'm white and posh and all of that, and still was somehow made to feel like I shouldn't even be there. How do you every day go back to that place and make a claim for why you should be there? And was there ever a moment at the beginning when you didn't feel that, or when you felt you did have to change?
I think that, for a start off, just a little story about John Hayes, that when we changed the rules, and I was on the committee that changed the rules, that said that men didn't have to wear ties in the chamber, and he said he would never take an intervention in a debate from somebody not wearing a tie. So I just pointed out to him that meant all women. Yeah. Tosser.
I did after...
Tosser. I mean, I'm really pissed off that he said that to you. I'm going to literally hunt him down.
To be honest, after he made this big statement and got all his friends involved, and then I just went, fine, I'll see you in the House of Parliament. And I've never wanted to be an MP, but I was like, I'm going to do it just for this.
Spite is an amazing motivator. But I do. When I say I don't feel, in the debates and things, actually, I've never felt excluded. But in the building, and the thing they will say a certain number of things to me, and it was said to me the other day in the speech that went viral, because there's a moment that has been made into a meme where I go, "Crack on then, love." And that was because, I think it was Daniel Kaczynski is his name, he just started shouting, "Oh, it's just student politics." And they will do that. They will basically diminish you as if you're a child all the time.
Right.
Oh, it's just, take your student politics somewhere else. And of course, like, you know, I didn't. There was no student politics at my university. Everybody was just smoking weed and having sex, which is maybe not what they were doing at Daniel Kaczynski's university, but whatever.
It probably was. Does that mean emotional politics?
Well, no, what he means is that, you know, this is you're being childish and you're not dealing with the cerebral elements of the debate. And they do it all the time, but maybe he meant emotional, but that was the way that he was trying to shut me down. So at which point he wasn't intervening on me. He wasn't willing to stand up and say it. He was shouting it out. So I stopped and I said, "Crack on, stand up and say it to me." A bit like, "You're going to say that to my face?" I was a barmaid for 10 years. And he refused to stand up and say it. So they do think you get an awful lot of that, like you don't understand. But actually, it has never ever made me feel that I shouldn't carry on or that I couldn't keep going, because what I know is that I am much more like the vast majority of the country that these people claim to represent than they. And actually, the people who don't understand are the kind of people who say things like that to me. They don't understand what it is. I remember one the gallant MPs, that means you've been in the army, and you're meant to say, "My gallant friend," or "the gallant member." But how am I meant to? I don't have like Wikipedia open on what their previous job was. So gallant and learned, and one gallant MP. I'd stood up in a debate about airstrikes in Syria, and
Are you gallant?
I'm not gallant. I was never in the army. No.
Oh, sorry.
I am gallant.
I see.
But I wasn't actually in the army. So he had stood up and said that basically, I didn't know what I was talking about because I'd never served in the armed forces. Right. So I asked him if he'd ever voted on any maternity services or anything to do with abortion. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, you don't have a womb, so you don't get to say if you've ever voted on anything to do with childcare. So I can't talk about matters of war, but you can talk about my womb." And that sort of thing happens to you all the time, constantly trying to diminish you. But you just have to not let it. You have to keep pushing against it. And I have to say, I feel genuinely superior most of the time.
But how, I mean, I think it's incredible. I think you are genuinely superior.
Thanks.
All the time. But I mean, I know when I work with a lot of women who do let that wear them down.
Yes,
and
totally.
I think more often than not, when you're told you don't belong again and again and again, you don't fight back, you start to believe it, and you start to think there's something wrong with you. How have you got yourself in a position where you're able to see what bullshit that is?
I mean, I don't. Sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
It depends on how you are each and every day. It depends what other stuff is going on in your lives. And for a lot of women, there is a million different things that are going on in their lives. Like, I mean, I was in the debate last week and I was just like, I've got to remember to apply for secondary school for one of my children. I was like that. And then I rang my husband, he'd already done it, thank God. If I'm under a huge amount of pressure, the thing that will always creep in is self-doubt.
Yeah.
And I have to fight that just as much as anybody else has to fight that. I suppose when talking about speaking truth to power, what really worries me is that too easily the reaction of people, even at the moment when most people will say, I want to do something, but I just don't know what that something is. That you hear that a lot. Like people will ring me and say, I really want to do something about this, that, or that. I say, and can you give me some advice? And I'm like, oh, it's quite difficult. I'm not running a career service, but I'll try. the trouble is that the instant reaction of most people, especially if you are from a marginalised group, is there's nothing I can do about this. There's nothing I can do to change this. There's no point. Nobody ever listens. That sort of rhetoric gets thrown around an awful lot, and so you have to try and fight that. You have to try and think, well, nothing changes nothing, that's for sure. If you do nothing, you will change nothing. But I do have to just sit as my mother used to say to me, you sit in the corner and have a word with yourself. I do have to sit in the corner and have a word with myself sometimes. And lots of women will do that. They will think that Westminster is full of brilliant wits who are amazing and know everything about everything. It is full of those people, but they just work for MPs and they've written it down in a speech for them. And you too could get one of those brilliant people to write down facts about anything for you.
And I think a huge part of speaking truth to power is recognising when power isn't speaking truth. Like, it's recognising that actually you might have been told something again and again by someone very powerful, but it doesn't mean it's the case.
I mean, that is what I find really frightening, actually, at the moment, is the perceived idea of what is true.
Yeah.
And the perceived idea that certain people get a big... it's like having a blue tick on Twitter, that if these people say something, then it must be right for everybody. Yeah. And it's just like, hang on a minute, I'm not sure I was involved in this consultation. Yeah. And it's funny because actually, talking about speaking truth to power, it is absolutely true that if you have one of the protected characteristics, your voice is definitely harder to hear for all sorts of reasons, because power largely still sits in the hands of wealthy white people. And that is absolutely without question true. And yet what I find when I study people who have done it and speak truth to power is that you are much more likely to speak truth to power if you are gay, black, or a woman, or a disabled person. You are much more likely to do it because you've had practice at trying to get your voice heard. You've had to shout up. You've had to hit the first barrier, the initial, and then keep going through. So actually, I think that in a world where there is such a need to speak truth to power, I actually think that those people, they've got it down.
It's a bit of a superpower.
They're our army. They're gallant.
Agreed. It's interesting you said that thing about don't know what to do, because I think I hear that a lot as well, and people feel like they can't do anything. And I think a lot of people feel like all the power is in the hands of politicians, and we're all a bit, the only thing we can do is tweet. What do you think normal people can do to make a difference?
People are much more powerful than they think they are, and I really wish that they realised this. If you're talking about politics, politicians are genuinely terrified of people because you vote for them, and you should make them earn your vote, even if you live in a seat that is always voted the same way. Make them, because I've got a 17,000 majority and I'm still convinced I'm going to lose. That is, that's just the disease of a politician. So you can get those people to listen to you. If you have a genuine issue, they are meant to be there for you. And whilst we still have a gold-class parliamentary democracy in this country, slowly going out of date, there is a real, it is the best thing about the UK democracy is that we are accessible to the people. We genuinely are. You wouldn't get it in any other part of the world. There's quite a lot of my constituents who come from very oppressive parts of the world, and not oppressive, not that we would think we're oppressive. And when I say, do you want to come out door knocking with me, they cannot believe that I would go unarmed knocking on my constituents' doors. They're like, what are people like when you answer the door? And I'm like, they're all right. Some of them are happy, some of them are not so happy. And they're like, I just cannot believe that you walk around the streets. And, so the people have a lot more power to sweat out of politicians. But there is a huge amount that people can be doing. And I suppose in writing the book that I just wrote, every single one of the people who spoke truth to power in that, so one of them had one of the Murdoch newspapers shut down. One of them basically took on the government about social housing and is winning. One of them took on Harvey Weinstein, and jury's out, but currently winning. And another, his mother was sadly killed speaking truth to power, taking on the Maltese government and some of the terrible things that they've been doing with offshore money. And these are just ordinary people. Then not one of them, every single one of them woke up the morning that they did something amazing as an ordinary human being. Rosa Parks worked in a department store. Doreen Lawrence was a bank clerk. You know, these people, they're no different to ordinary people. So it's you don't necessarily need to go around looking for a cause. A cause will usually find you. There will be some shit going on where you work. There will be some shit going on down your street. The council will be making a crap decision about where to plant trees. You know more than you think about where you live, where you work, what your life should be like. You know, you're more of an expert on that than the people making the decisions. Make sure that they can hear your voice.
I also think that's a huge statement on often the things we see about people speaking truth to power are big, huge news stories that are kind of national or global. And actually, probably the most difference and the most powerful difference you can have is something in your community, something small. And that can feel like, oh, but that's not worth doing. But if every single person was to do that...
In every single meeting that I have ever been in all my life, there is some twat who will say, oh, we can't change anything until we can change everything.
Yeah.
Ignore that person. They are a knob. They are the person who basically makes you feel bad because you're trying to not use a plastic straw. Like, if that's all you can manage, don't use a plastic straw. I'm not going to criticise you.
We even saw it with free periods where it ended up being a big change, but the reason it happened was because hundreds of girls set up groups in their school or in their community or in their university to do that. And actually, the other day, me and Grace were at a theatre that is university as well in Edinburgh, and we both came on our periods and didn't have tampons, and there was a homeless period tampon box there, and we took them.
Exactly. So you've helped yourself there again.
It's all selfish, but you can help yourself. It's all selfish.
Yeah, so don't worry if you can't change everything. Just change what you can.
I'm hesitant to ask this because men aren't asked this.
Because men aren't asked it.
Yeah, but as a daughter of a very busy man, I actually wish they were asked this more, so I still think it's quite a good question. How do you balance being a mother and having a family and being a politician?
Well, my son is in a dark room watching The Shining at the moment. It's not. I was about to say it's not easy, but for me it is easy now because you just climatise to any environment, and I've been doing it for 4 years now. I think that it is hard to be a mum and you will always think you're not a good enough mum, and you will always think if you're being a good enough mum, you're not being good enough at work. There's no two ways about that. And I feel guilty that they get lumped in with me all the time, and I want them to have their own identities and all that sort of thing. I mean, I don't want them to vote Conservative. But if they did, I would still love them. Well, everybody else in my family voted Lib Dem in the last election, so maybe they will. Just the European one, not a real one. Not a real one. It is hard to be. It's hard to be a mum and be anything. Actually, I found it harder when I worked in refuge. My husband was a night shift worker, and we were like ships that passed in the night. So most people will just cope with whatever is thrown at them. What I don't want people to think is that you can't be a politician and be a mum. I mean, there is some upside because I don't live with my children 3 days a week. So if you were to ask my husband this question, he would have a much more detailed and difficult question to answer because it is much harder on him in reality. It's him who ends up doing all of the work. To be fair, he always has, really, because he worked in the nights, he was always there in the days. He always has been their full-time childcarer. What I don't like about it is that people make judgments of you because of it. Yeah. That's the thing that I find the hardest, not the actual logistics, because you can work out logistics. I don't like that people make a judgment that because I am a mother, I'm emotional, or that... I actually really don't like it that people make judgments about people who don't have children. That's the worst thing I think that happens in Westminster, is that judgments are made about, like Theresa May suffered from that, as if she was going to press the nuclear button because she didn't care about the future, when everybody who's got children would know you're much more likely to you have children. Yeah. I'm going to fucking kill you all unless you shut up! For example.
that's
My mum used to
also-
threaten to section me because she worked at a mental health trust. I can section you now, I've got the power.
I think that's also a judgment only made. Do you want to talk about that more?
She did never section me.
My mum used to threaten to kick us out the car when we were driving. And leave us
Yeah,
on the
I mean,
street.
I've definitely done that.
Yeah.
I've slammed my foot on the brake
Yeah.
and been like, I'll kick you all out.
I'm actually really interested in that, you with Theresa May. How did it feel sort of being in the opposition party to a female, only our second female Prime Minister for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I was pleased that she was a woman.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it. And I hate the idea that because she was a bit crap, that means all women are crap. Like there haven't been loads of crap men. Like now we won't let blonde people be in charge of anything. Boris Johnson. I mean, it's just,
I wouldn't mind that.
What I will say is that I believe Theresa May is a feminist. I genuinely do believe that deep down, she is disgusted at the gender pay gap, disgusted at violence against women and girls. I genuinely think that. But I have to say I never found her to be much of a sister in the sense that when sexist things happened, like remember the Legsit newspaper front page of her and Sturgeon, and when like people in her own side or on my side, I have had to stand up and basically call out the sex pestery of everybody, regardless of which side it has fallen on. I did always feel like Theresa May would always pick the status quo of where the power lay, rather than being courageous and radical and actually being what you have to be sometimes if you're a feminist, and that is that you have to challenge, you have to speak truth to power and challenge the status quo, and she never ever did that.
You have to be willing to be called the annoying feminist.
Yeah.
Like I'm that person now that people don't say things around because they know I'm going to have a problem with it, and I'd rather be that than sort of
exactly. And she would never roll out and I'm afraid to say the Jeffrey boycott thing is just another example of where she just sort of has missed the mark.
This is my last question, but this festival is called House Change Your Life. How has being a politician, speaking truth to power, living a life of kind of service in many ways, I think you have
like a nun.
changed your life?
How has it changed my
your
life? Oh, my life is so dramatically changed in a way that I just never, ever thought it was possible. That's why I come and do things like this, and I say yes to pretty much everything, because every opportunity that I get given since I was a Member of Parliament are things that I would not have been able to imagine as a kid that anyone would ever ask me to do. So I get loads of snippy comments. I was in Vogue recently. It's the first time I think Acock's Green in Birmingham's ever going to get a mention in Vogue. But they had me out like outside like the news agent. I was like, this is so Vogue. People that get really snippy and say things like, oh, well, you shouldn't do that, it's frippery, you've changed, blah, blah, blah. But, if you walked up to anyone in my constituency and said, would you want to dress up all day and be in Vogue? They'd be like, yeah, I do. Show me where to go. So the amount of Parliament has given me an enormous loud halo where people pay attention to the things I've been saying in the pub since about 2003 and listen. And it has totally, having a powerful voice and having the privilege that people listen and that you can get it out there is life-changing, because I have power. I think that in the speaking truth to power, power always is considered to be a bad thing. Yeah. But I have power, a huge amount of power, and that is amazing to me. I am so... it has totally changed my life. Now, I have spent my life in service, as you said, and I will try and use that power for good, but I could never have imagined as a kid how much it would change my life. I'm much richer now as well. Like people in Parliament say, I had to take a pay cut to come and work in here. The wages aren't very good. Lots and lots of people say that sort of thing. Yeah. And it's just like, are you joking? Where I live, people earn 22 grand and that is good. And so I earn much more money than I used to. So my house is a bit nicer as well.
Amazing. It's a great way to end. You're my hero, and I think you're incredible.
You're my hero, Scarlett.
Definitely not. Maybe when I'm the first pink-haired MP.
Well, I just want to, on that point, there have been 2 pink-haired MPs,
really?
so I just think John Hayes can't see.
Maybe.
Or just didn't notice, because they were both
He
women.
didn't see them because they were women.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here, and a huge round of applause for Jess Phillips. Where do we go?
I don't know. I don't know which way we go.
This way. We go sit on our toes.